Okay, thank you so much for joining me today.
Certainly.
What is your name?
My name's Allison Anderson.
Okay, and you're not here in Texas, are you?
I am not. I'm in Palm Harbor, Florida.
Okay, fantastic. Is it as miserably hot there right now?
Oh, it's surface of the sun hot.
Ah,
Yes.
yes. Okay, so it's basically Texas, just a
Yeah.
little bit further away. Okay, tell me a little bit about your family, if you don't mind, Allison.
Well, my husband, Tim, and I are here, and we have our son, Ben, who is 19 and still lives with us. And about a year ago, we lost our son, Sam, who he would be turning 16 this summer. And he was profoundly brain injured when he was born. He was injured. He was injured during delivery.
During delivery?
Mhm.
Okay, before the delivery, was everything going according to plan? Did
Yeah, as far as we knew, he was everything was fine, and it was a pretty run of the mill pregnancy. And I was 39 when he was born, so I was tested a lot for all kinds of things, and he was he was bigger than they expected. He was just under 10 pounds. But then they thought just until, gosh, I think it was the day before he was born, they promised me he was 7 pounds. So that was a little bit of a shock. But yeah, everything was pretty normal.
Wow, okay. So what happened at the delivery that resulted in the brain injury?
He was my uterus ruptured and his cord was in a knot. And the doctor had left the hospital to go out to dinner. And he left without checking on us first. And things had been going wrong um, a lot. So, why that happened, why he left, it's not anything I'll ever have an answer to. But so that was the whole thing was very traumatic, and things turned pretty quickly from this is going to be a more difficult delivery than my other child to um, basically they came out and told my husband that neither one of us was going to survive. And then I remember they rushed me um, into the emergency delivery room. And when I woke up, there were a whole bunch of people around me, including my pastor. So that was when I went, oh, things didn't really go as expected. So at that point, Sam had been flown to the trauma hospital, and I was still at the hospital near here. So he was about an hour away, and they had not expected him to survive the flight. Actually, they didn't expect that he would survive for a few minutes, but um, yeah. So he made it to just about 15 years. So
Wow. So not expected to survive minutes and he
yes.
survived years, which that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah. He was a
actually
strong
lucky.
little guy.
He was an awesome kid. I was so glad I got to meet him because
Me too.
he was awesome. And I got to meet him twice. So when was the first time that you actually got to meet him?
It actually, surprisingly, I think about this, it took them a few days to let me out of the hospital. And I had to demand that they let me out of the hospital. They seemed surprised that I wanted to get to him. So he was born on a Thursday and it was Saturday. And I think that they thought it would be too upsetting for me to go. It was very strange. But anyway, so I went over to the hospital, and I wasn't in great shape, but you that doesn't even make any sense to not let me there. So
Exactly.
um, so he was in the NICU at Tampa General Hospital, and at that time, I understand things are very different now, but at that time, there were no facilities for parents to stay at all. So I sat in the chair, and we had a hotel room nearby. Um, the we had that was the summer I don't think that the rest of the country remembers this summer, but that summer we had nonstop hurricanes in Florida. It was one after the other, after the other, after the other. Texas, you might remember that sort of thing. But so there were times that I slept in the waiting room. And, but generally I just stayed there with Sam. He was so swollen from the brain injury that it was a few weeks before before the swelling went down enough for his eyes to open. But he was pretty big, which was unusual in the NICU. Most of the babies were very tiny.
Was
So
it a
he
pretty
was.
big NICU?
I don't know. I don't know what to compare it to. I know that when we were first there were 12 babies in the NICU, and then because of all the hurricanes, all the babies were born. All the preemies and the multiples were born. So at one point, they had to place a feeding tube. So we went over to a different hospital because they didn't have a surgeon available. And when we got back to Tampa General, there were 50 babies.
Oh,
So
okay.
they went from 12 babies to 50 babies, and they had opened up all the closets and turned them into rooms. And so I don't know, it was chaos, but we still had our little corner, and he was very stable. So he didn't need a whole lot of attention, and I was there. So I think we just sort of they thought of us as furniture after a while. And so, which I was happy about. I just wanted to put a bubble over us and say, just everybody leave us be. And it took us a little bit to get out of there because of all the storms. They couldn't get the medical equipment to get us out. So it was, he was not released for about 6 weeks, but probably without the hurricanes, he probably would have been sent home in about 3 or 4, because there wasn't really anything to do. He was stable and just in the hospital waiting till the time that he could go home. So.
Okay. And you mentioned he had to have a feeding tube.
Yeah.
What other equipment did you guys go home at that 6-week mark with?
I asked them, well, they sent us home with the apnea monitor, which he didn't really need because he didn't have apnea. I had to beg for a pulse oximeter because that was what he needed. But I don't remember why the apnea monitor, because the apnea monitor alarmed constantly and it was always false. There was nothing, it was just shrieking all the time. And so I stopped using it, and somebody came and said, you can get in trouble for this. And I said, why? And they said, oh, never mind. You're right. You're not going to get in trouble for it. And then they took it away. I was like, okay. And so then we had once we had the pulse ox, then things calmed down tremendously. And I think the feeding pump and the pulse ox were the only thing that we had at first. We did have the suction machine because he couldn't swallow.
Okay.
And that was about it to start with. He came home in September, and then Thanksgiving, he had an incident where he had a little bit of a cold. And so he had, my husband went to check on him and felt like he had stopped breathing and called 911, and we just kind of flipped him over, patted him on the back, and cleared out his throat, and he was okay. But by then the paramedics came and they took him to the hospital, and they wouldn't release him because they couldn't get a hold of our pediatrician, and it was a whole big thing. And he was fine and peaceful, but they ended up sending him to a different hospital. And on the way to the hospital, he had a dirty diaper. And because of the brain injury, when he cried because of the dirty diaper, he sounded bad, and they thought that he had RSV, and they intubated him. And when they intubated him, they also gave him a spinal tap, and which caused him to cry and vomit, and it was all just bad. And so then they put him on a helicopter and sent him down to the children's hospital, And I remember so well, I was on the whole ride down there, I was thinking half the ride down there, I was thinking I must just be the worst mother that I didn't know he was that sick. And then I was thinking, no, I've had him on my lap for, all day long. He wasn't sick. I know that he wasn't sick. And when we got down there at the children's hospital, which was very different, where they were not alarmed by children in Sam's condition, they said, no, you're right, he's not sick. And but at that point, there was a doctor who decided that he should that he needed to have a trach placed. So, being relatively new to all of that, we were terrified and called the doctor and called lawyers and called everybody, and eventually went ahead with it because there was really no way around it. They were threatening that if we didn't let them place the trach, then if anything happened to him, then they would press charges against us, and just it was a really, really scary, terrible time. And so we went ahead and let them place the trach. And that we found out later when we had one of the private nurses that came home to help care for him afterwards, that the doctor who had insisted on placing the trach had told all of them at the hospital that he was just going to die in the hospital anyway, and it would just be easier for them to take care of him with the trach. So obviously he was wrong. Also, I was very wrong. A trach is not the biggest thing in the world. And I ended up, as time went on, I would throw him on the hood of the car and change the trach there. And it was just really not a big deal at all. It was like changing an earring and not a problem. So, and I think that well, I'm sure that having the trach made it a lot easier on him, clearing his throat and all of that stuff as time went on. As when he was 3 months old, it was a lot different than when he was 14, and just, So then he had the trach, and then of course the suction machine all the time. And then as he got a little older, he couldn't blink, he couldn't swallow. Couldn't walk. So then as he got older, then he had a wheelchair. He had more chairs than a furniture store because we're always trying to find more ways to make him comfortable. And, so we did that. And and any other equipment. He had a stander that we used for a while, but that always felt wrong to me. That felt that because I know that if his joints weren't formed properly, we were jamming improper joints improper ways, and that didn't seem like there was any point in it. And it didn't necessarily make him uncomfortable, but I didn't think it was doing anything good. So we stopped using that. So I can't think of any other equipment that we have, which sounds crazy because I know we have seems like we had equipment everywhere all the time, but yeah.
Now, I know you guys had some special pool floats for him as well that were pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did. We had the simplest thing was a float that we ended up ordering from Australia that kind of went around his neck and behind his back and wrapped around, and it was maybe $30, which is insane because everything we ever spent that had special needs attached to it, it wasn't under $300.
Right.
So no, I mean, this, even with shipping from Australia, it was like $35. And then we had another thing that was many pieces together that kept him above the water because everybody thought I was crazy. You don't put a kid with a trach in the water, but yeah.
But if you liked it. Yep. So how did you guys communicate with Sam?
Well, you know those kids who don't communicate and communicate very well and very loudly when they want to.
Yep.
Sam could say very clearly when he wasn't happy, and he could make the most unhappy face, which was just. And I don't mean like a heartbreaking face, just a very mad, just a face when he wanted to. And he could, but he would wink. And it was funny. He had such a strong personality because we moved. Sam lived in two different counties, and when he first started school, I was not about to leave him at school because I didn't trust anybody else to take care of him. And so I would stay with him, and I would see him interacting with the teachers and the people who were there tending to him. And he communicated very specifically with them. He would turn his head. And when he would turn his head, he could only turn his head this way. So he could hit a switch. We would put one of those big buttons on his wheelchair, and he could hit a switch, and he could communicate that way. There were some games that he could play. There were some that the switch could sometimes turn on a thing that would make a noise that we could record. We had our other son record some words that, yes, no, I don't want to, things like that. And so Sam could activate that. And then when we went to a different county, he stopped doing that. And then he started winking. And he would answer the new teachers by winking at them. So I used to plead with him and say, this does not serve you at all. So turning your head, and that's a better form of communication. But he had very specific, even down to the games that he would play with Miss Jessica, he wouldn't play with Miss Lisa. And it was just, he was loyal. There were things he had, in the first school that he went to, there was a teacher who was just very known for how energetic and enthusiastic. He's a super animated teacher, and he was just known for what a great teacher he was for working with kids like Sam that really had very little means of communication. And so I just thought, well, I'd like to go meet him and see if he has any ideas for us. I never planned to have Sam attend school there. And so we went to meet him, and Sam really liked a fan. So I had a little fan that clipped onto his wheelchair, and he could turn that on with the switch. And so his teacher, Todd, saw that he liked the fan. So he said, okay, well, can you bring him in the next day? So I brought Sam in the next day. Todd had gotten industrial fans. It was like a hurricane in the classroom.
Oh, wow.
Had them connected to switches, and it was crazy. And so Todd had industrial fans set up all over the place. And now, there's still like 8 other kids in the room, and they all have just as much equipment as Sam has. They also don't like fans. So he was just going to figure out how to get to Sam. So he had, and of course, he won my heart completely when he had all of that done, set up for Sam. So I said, all right, well, we'll come back. So Sam started going. They let me stay in the classroom for a month, and I was just watching Sam just work this teacher to death. And so Todd would come over, and he wanted Sam to choose between 2 color things, whatever, green or orange or whatever. And you know how generally with kids, you just cheer them on and say, go, 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 go. And Sam was not here for that. So Todd was going, okay, Sam, what do you want? Do you want orange? Do you want green? And Sam was just not responsive at all. And I'm watching Todd just jumping up and down and doing all this stuff and carrying on. And it went on. It must have been 5 minutes, no exaggeration. And so finally Todd starts walking away. And he gets far enough away that it's a problem. And Sam finally answers and like hits the switch. He was hitting the switch at that point. So Todd comes flying back where Sam sits and does nothing again. So Todd finally catches on that Sam's working him, and he thinks that he can go just a little bit away and watch him. And no, he has to get fully away, where he's leaping over wheelchairs and walkers and standers and all of that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's really cute though. That's his big personality. That's Sam.
Yep, he was in charge of stuff.
Wow. Was it the same at home? Was he, very specific about everything at home and
I don't know. I don't think so. I think he just was, we weren't as demanding and trying to get responses from him in the same way that the teachers were trying to get responses from him. So, it was just, because we were just living. So I think it was just different. So he had a speech therapist one time who was, I don't know if and they stroke their tongue and they're supposed to pump their tongue back. So she was a super negative one.
oh.
And she just kept wanting to make sure that I knew how sad this all was. Okay.
Well,
and so she would do this, and Sam would just not do what she asked. So she would stroke his tongue and say, okay, now Sam, you do it 4 times, and he would do it 3. She'd say, okay, do it 6 times, he would do it 5. And we would sit there for 45 minutes, and he would do 1 short every single time. And all she got out of that was that he couldn't do it. So we go out to the car, and I'd stick my thumb in his mouth, and I'd say, all right, do it 14 times. And he would do it 14 times. I was like, all right, never mind. So, I don't like her either.
Sure. Yeah, you just didn't like her.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody's allowed to have the people they like and they don't like. I know.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I'm sure you do.
Yeah. He was right. He was right. He was not wrong about the people that, he didn't like people who, pitying isn't the right word, but the people who carried on, and he didn't like people who were afraid of him. He didn't like people who didn't talk to him, of course.
Right.
And he didn't like, I didn't like people who just gushed and he just liked to be treated as normally as possible, I guess. And
I think that's pretty much all kids, really.
yeah.
Just want to be treated normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. How did he get along with his brother?
They got along well. Ben just absolutely adored him, and it was quite a while. Ben used to just hold Sam all the time until he got to be a little bit too big for that. So and Ben always thought that it was just a very special blessing that he got to be Sam's brother. So I think Ben was probably somewhere 7th or 8th grade by the time he realized that people were not always that kind, and that it was, sometimes that people were not that nice to Sam, and things were harder than they should be. But yeah, Ben just adored him.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of special needs siblings, there's something about them. They have, more patience and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And they have these kind souls. And there's a special place in my heart for special needs siblings. I think they're amazing people. Do you think he might end up going into some sort of profession with the special needs at some point, or nah?
I don't know. I don't know. He is he's very confused as to why people can't just be decent to each other. So I don't know how much of that is just really, why can't people just be decent to each other, or relates back to Sam. I'm not sure. He's not interested in the medical profession, I know. So I don't know.
Okay. Maybe like a music therapist. I could see him being really
maybe. Yeah, because he liked to play the drums. Sam loved the drums, and Ben liked to play the drums for him a lot. And we have a lot of musical instruments that Ben liked to play and help Sam play a little bit. And so maybe.
After, so you went to school with Sam for the first month.
Hmm.
And then after that, was there a nurse that was with Sam, or how did that look?
Well, yeah, that was at his first school, and that was not a great situation. I never felt comfortable leaving him there for very long. The school was 50% of the population there are special needs, so they had some nurses. So his doctors had always said that he needed to have a dedicated nurse who was just one-on-one with him, and that was my stipulation, 100%, that I'm not having him, in a room with nurses that are tending to other kids. And so they would have a nurse that was just on staff, and then when Sam was there, she was just there for him.
Okay.
And I always thought,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that's actually happening. I know as a person, I can't say, no, sorry, other kids, I'm not going to take care of you right now because this one's here.
Right.
But what am I going to do? So I had him there for just a few hours. When that first started, I sat in the parking lot for hours. And, he only stayed for 4 hours. And I sat in the parking lot, and then I went to a park down the street. And so that didn't last for very long. His feeding tube got pulled out, and it just wasn't great. He got sick a lot, and I'm sure that it was from that and from tending to other kids. When I sat in the classroom, I just saw a lot of the classroom was a very happy place. And so a lot of other teachers came in, and a lot of other adults came in, and they would help feed the kids, and no one's hands were ever getting washed, and kids were having runny noses and bloody noses, and they were being fed, and then the hands were,
Okay.
so, yeah. So it just, it wasn't great, and I was never real comfortable with it. So, so anyway, so then when we moved, it took a little while to get, since he was in a different county, all the rules changed. So it took a little while. He was, oddly, the first child, he didn't have Medicaid. And apparently that was an issue, because they agreed that he needed a private nurse, but he was the only one in the county who didn't have Medicaid, and that was who supplied the nurses. So the school paid for the nurse, and the school was awesome. They said, this is our problem, it's not yours, but we got to figure it out. Okay, I'm in no rush to send him. We'll stay home until you figure this out. And so they finally did.
Okay.
And so we had a nurse who would come to our house and ride the school bus with him, and take him to school, and that all worked very well. We had generally we had very good nurses, but it was really an awesome situation, and I can't complain about the situation at all. It was because the school said I was in charge of the nurses. They reported to me, and the school paid the bill, and that.
Yeah, you don't hear that often. Yeah.
No, and they said, if you have a problem with the nurse, you tell us and we'll fire them. Well, okay. So,
Yeah.
and I did. So, yeah, that was.
They're not all winners.
Yeah.
There's some nurses that are good nurses, but they're not necessarily the right nurse for that patient.
Yeah.
And there's some nurses that are just not good nurses.
Yeah.
It goes both ways. So
Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do for your kid.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. Now, did you guys have nursing at home as well?
When Sam was first born, we did for a little bit. It got to be kind of weird just having, he was stable, and so it just, always having an extra person in your house is a lot. So we didn't have that for too long. And when I realized I was coming up with any excuse to call the nurses off, then I went, okay, I think maybe this is, there was nothing wrong with the nurses. It was just it's just a lot always having someone else there. So, so then we did it for a long time. Sam, I had the pulse oximeter on him at night, and then I had a baby monitor. So he generally needed attention all through the night. And then I thought for a little while that maybe I might like to have overnight nursing, and that maybe I might go back to work. I taught high school until he was born, and I thought I might like to do that. And we had that for a little bit, for maybe a month, and then found out that our insurance company had changed the rules and we couldn't have that anymore. So never mind.
Oh,
So yeah. But as far as having at-home nursing, we had one of the school nurses was just wonderful, and so she, we would just hire her separately to come if we wanted to go to a movie or something like that, or for a day out, and she would come hang out with Sam. And
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. I had a question that popped up when you were talking about the nursing. Oh, the Medicaid. Does Florida do Medicaid waivers?
All right, you're not going to believe this story.
Okay.
Yes, Florida has Medicaid waivers. Sam went on the waiver list before he was 2. Okay. We were told that, he had to get on the med waiver list, that it would provide respite and massage and a whole bunch of other things for him. And, he was on the waiting list, but because Florida had so many people, that he just wasn't making any progress moving up the list. I actually got a call one time from somebody. They called to check on us, like once a year, once every 2 years, to check our address. They said that because we're a stable family living in a stable home, we were not going to make any progress up the list. But at the point that I was suicidal, I should call them and they would bump us up the list. So, of course, who's doing that? But so the day that Sam passed, which was on a Sunday, they called us that night and said that he had just been approved for the waiver.
Are you serious?
Yeah, they called my husband's number and he said, and we kind of laugh about it now. At the point, we were just in such shock. He passed very early in the morning, and this was probably 8:00 at night. And, later we were going, that woman who called us has the best job in the world. She calls people and says, "You finally made it on the waiver." And my husband said he died this morning. But yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he spent 12 years on that list. So yeah, I think that's a story that needs to be told somewhere when I figure out where that is. But
yeah, that might need to go to your congressman. And
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Wow, that's a phone call. I wouldn't know how. I think I might lose my mind on that person calling to give me great.
Well, he said, "I need you to know before I say anything else that I'm not kidding when I tell you what I'm about to tell you." And I'm thinking, what in the world? Because I'm just hearing that. I'm thinking, what in the world is happening? Right. And he said, of course she started laughing. He said, "No, really, I'm not kidding." And then he told her, and then she laughed. He said, "I'm telling you, I'm not kidding." And then she was, oh no. And of course she was very apologetic. And
oh, wow.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that is not good. That's
no. Yeah, Florida's I've had some friends of special needs families who have left the state because of that med waiver just being useless for so long.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I know most states have them, but yeah, most states have some wait list, but 12 years for a medically complex kid is just ridiculous.
Well, yeah, and there's supposed to be, I mean, I've heard of a lawsuit because by nature of being on the waiting list, it means you can't be on a waiting list. It means you need the services. So,
Wow. Gosh. Well, I am sorry to hear that story. That is alarming. And I would definitely share that story with your congressman if you could.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow. So most of the time Sam was home with you guys.
Yes.
Did he have to go to the hospital very often, or
No, he did not.
No?
He was almost never. He went to, other than when he was born, and that 6 weeks then, and then when he had the trach placed, he got an infection in the hospital when the trach was placed, and so he went back 3 weeks later. And then when he was a couple years old, he had ear tubes put in, and when he had the ear tubes put in, and they were asking for hospitalizations, and I said there aren't any. And they kept saying, you don't understand what we're asking. I said, I do understand. He doesn't have any. And that was it. So he didn't,
That's fantastic.
other than that, he wasn't in the hospital. And no, there was time. He had a couple of seizures early on, and we had a very bad experience. He had a prolonged seizure, and he had to go to the hospital to be put on meds. And the hospital, the emergency room where we took him to, we had a terrible experience. And when they sent him to the children's hospital, and they put him in a private room with a bed next to it. And it was kind of funny because they were so upset by what had happened. The emergency room had been terrible to us. And they were so upset that they pretended that they didn't know if we needed to be quarantined. Like we may have traveled overseas to some countries that if we had picked up, something, and just kept saying, oh, I keep forgetting to ask you if you've traveled to any third world countries lately. And that way I could sleep while they took care of Sam. And we were there for, I think, 4 days while they regulated the seizure meds. But
well, at least they let you stay. That's
yes, they were wonderful. And yeah, but that was it.
Wow. Okay.
And he wasn't on those for very long. Once I changed his diet, he didn't have any more seizures, and he was done with that. So
let's talk about his diet. His diet was interesting. How did you feed him?
It was interesting. Well, I researched a lot because, what are you going to do? So a kid with a brain injury, there's not much to do with a brain injury. And the doctors didn't know much to tell me. It was just, we don't know. I had a few doctors who said, we don't know much about the brain. And anybody who tells you they do is lying. And I had a few doctors who said, we know everything about the brain, and just listen to that. So we just, I ignored them. Yeah. But just really with the internet, with talking to other moms and things that had worked, and I found this diet that made sense, and it was just a place to start, and it ended up really, really doing well for him. It was a specific carbohydrate diet, so basically no grains and sugars and things, but then the food was also very overly processed, but processed by me. So it was a lot of carbohydrates, but from beans and vegetables and things like that. It was meat. It was very balanced, but balanced by, it was just me. It was just, figuring things out. And then I blended it up in the blender, and he did great on it. And once I got him on that, he gained weight in inches, just a ton. He had been super scrawny for a long time. He had not put on weight in, gosh, I feel like it was years. I don't know. He had been hovering at about like 35 pounds for a while. And then once I got him on this diet, he just started, because he wasn't able to process everything. It was, he had diarrhea a lot, which the doctor, I had 2 doctors tell me that it was because he had a feeding tube. Okay, I'm just not going to ask you anything else. So. And then and that went away once I changed his diet. And then obviously it was because he wasn't able to process the things that were in his food prior to that. And I actually, he was on a blended diet. He wasn't on formula before then. I was giving him a blended diet, but just not this diet.
Okay.
And so, and that was the case. And that was, you know, some of his doctors were really supportive of me figuring things out. They would, you know, sometimes I would do so much research and I would be so stressed out, and I would just like come in with just armed with all this knowledge, and the doctor would say, you know what you're doing, it's okay. Okay, never mind. I guess I'll go fight with somebody else then. But yeah, this diet really did wonders for him. He put on weight. He was certainly not scrawny, and he gained weight. He probably grew 6 to 8 inches over the next few months after he started on that. The seizures stopped, and yeah, he was good. He was big and chunky and did well. So it was just a matter of figuring out the stuff that he couldn't handle. And I think that was really a lot of the grains that he couldn't deal with. The brain injury it probably messed with. So.
And so did you blend these up every day, every meal, once a week, every day?
Yes. Yeah, every day. I cooked a big old pot of beans once a week, and beans, and then all these different vegetables and things that no one else in the house would eat ever. Kale and spinach and even liver sometimes, and things like that. And then I would just like freeze them into daily portions. So then I would put them in the blender every day. So.
Wow. That's dedication. That's impressive. I was impressed by his diet.
His diet was super, well, you know, it was funny because before I went to that diet, he was getting a healthy diet before, but it wasn't good for him. But it was healthy. But it looked like Shrek. It actually was the color of this wall. It was so green and bright, and it looked like just the best thing, and it wasn't any good for him. But yeah, but then once I switched him to the diet that worked for him, it was terrible looking and smelling and ugh,
but if it works.
It worked. It worked.
Wow. Now I know the last at least year, maybe a couple of years, he was doing CBD oil.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
He had, when Florida approved medical marijuana, he was one of the first to get his card. So Sam got approved for medical marijuana before Florida figured out how to give Sam medical marijuana. So I was jumping up and down because I just very strongly thought that it would help him. And I had taken him to a holistic pediatrician who then also became a medical marijuana doctor, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of strange the way that the doctors do it, but he was already a doctor and then added that to his repertoire or whatever. And so he prescribed it. He first said to give him the CBD oil, and then to build that up over a while, and then to add the THC, which is the cannabis, which is the what has the psychotropic effects or whatever. And when I first started giving him that, it wasn't helping. Sam was having, with the brain injury, he had a lot of tremors, and it was just really painful to watch. He was just shaking all the time. And summer was worse with the heat. It was just terrible. So that must have been 3 years ago. And so he was, so I had him on the CBD oil. By itself, the CBD oil didn't do anything. And I would call the doc, and then I added the THC, but it wasn't a balance because I was supposed to build that up to the level of the CBD. And so I called the doctor, and he said, well, it needs to get to be patient. It needs to get to a 1-to-1. And I said, well, I am not patient. I'm not doing that. So instead of building it up to the higher level where it would be as a 1-to-1, I dropped both levels down to a 1-to-1. And within 5 minutes, he stopped shaking.
Wow.
So he was, yeah. So I was able to keep him on a very low dose, and it was tremendous. So he was, that was a significant change. And, people, everyone could tell that in him. He just, it calmed him down so tremendously and quickly. I mean, there were still times where he would have some really bad breakthrough tremors, but it was manageable, and it wouldn't, he was having them for just hours, and it was just painful to watch. It
Wow.
didn't seem to cause him pain, but I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. But if it works, that's awesome.
Yeah.
There's so many uses for it now, and I'm
Mhm.
so glad that it's helping these kids.
Mhm.
How did you give it to him? Was it part of his food? Did you give it to him like a med in the feeding tube? Was it?
Yeah, yeah, he got it in the feeding tube. I may have sneaked it into his food as well, because they couldn't give it to him.
That works. And when he ate, did he eat at certain times? Was he a bolus feeder or was he a continuous feeder?
Sort of in between.
Okay.
I kept him on a relatively slow rate. Not really, I've talked to other moms who've said that was not a slow rate. I think I fed him at a rate of, I tried to let him have pretty much three meals, and then he ate on a pretty low rate overnight.
Okay.
So 4 meals, but so he did have periods throughout the day where he wasn't eating, but he never could handle bolus feeds.
Okay.
Once I could get him eating pretty steadily throughout the night, even though it was only on maybe a rate of like 40 mLs an hour, that was able to keep the weight on him. And so I didn't really stress too much during the day. Overnight, I fed him the really super fatty stuff, like with the nuts and things like that.
Okay.
So that kept him chunky, even if he had bad days where he wasn't so into eating.
Wow. Yeah, the feeding stuff is all such a challenge to figure it out
Yes.
and to stay on top of it. And yeah,
Right. You never think of anything else. It's just always food, 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 food. So
right. Oh, did we bring the extension? Oh, we've got to
yes.
extension. Oh, we've got, yeah. It's hard. What do we do? Yeah. It's nonstop. Wow. Well, I have a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, to you at, in the NICU, the first time you met Sam, what would you tell yourself?
I think, boy, I think that I would tell myself, or someone, not to be afraid to stand up and say, I have questions, explain this to me. I grew up thinking that doctors always knew everything, and that they were right, and that if they said a thing, then that was the end of that. And it's different when it's your child, but I still had a whole lot of, well, they must be right, and not wanting to argue, and that kind of thing. And then I found out they weren't necessarily always right, and that sometimes it's that what I thought was also right, and a lot of times my gut was also right. I found doctors who listened to me, and that was huge. There were doctors who very clearly, and that made all the difference. Doctors who listened to me and didn't dismiss me, and valued Sam my as my child, which sounds trite. I think that superficially they realize that, but I think sometimes they don't get that I wasn't necessarily expecting a special needs child,
Right.
and that I have Sam and Ben, and I expected Sam and Ben, and this isn't, I'm learning. And for example, I think I'm getting a little off track here, but with the medical supplies, I didn't know that I could get an extension replacement for a year.
Oh,
It was hard as a rock.
yeah.
How was I to know that, right?
Oh, wow.
I was using the same one. And then somebody said, why didn't you order one? How am I supposed to know I'm supposed to order one? And I said, you mean because of my 14 other children that have feeding tubes? You know, but, you know, it's just, I don't even think that had anything to do with anything that you just asked me. But
No,
yeah, the thought that, yeah, that all of the circumstances may have thrown things off a bit, and it just, that my yeah, the doctors who valued what I thought and my opinion and my intuition made a big difference when they could ask me just what I thought. When I said, I think Sam feels like this and I don't have a good explanation why, and they would go, okay, well, you're his mother, why wouldn't you know that? You know, it's like, thank you.
yeah.
I don't feel like I should have to defend that. So
Yeah, those were the best doctors.
yes.
I agree completely. Wow. Um, I was gonna ask you one other thing. Oh, so I know you're in Sam's room right now.
Mhm.
Is there any chance, I know you guys did some really cool modifications in there. Is there any chance I could get you to turn the camera to show the
I
bathroom?
can't because it's all been undone.
Oh, has it?
Yes, but I can send you pictures. I was thinking about that.
Yes, you knew I was gonna ask. I love
I
that bathroom.
know. I would, yeah, because yes, unfortunately,
Okay.
um, yeah, I'll send you pictures, and I can tell you what we did, because
Oh,
when we
that's what she did.
moved in, we had the wall between the main bathroom of the house and Sam's bedroom knocked out, and then we lifted up the bathtub. So Sam's room was just the bathroom was in there, the bathtub was lifted, and so it was all in one place. Sam's room was fantastic, but yeah, it didn't work to
But
keep it.
that saved your back a lot from lifting.
Saved my back a lot. Sam he could spend an hour in the bathtub if he wanted to, and yeah, that was great. But
Amazing. Yes, I always loved how you guys did that. I never even crossed my mind to do that. And I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's genius. Yeah, I love what you guys did.
yeah, the bathtub was a big help. And it was so easy to do, because I had asked bunch of contractors, and then our contractor who did it, all he did was they pulled the bathtub out and then they made a frame and they filled it with sandbags. So, and
Yeah,
then put the bathtub on top of it. So it was nothing. So
that's so cool. Yeah, I love how it came out. So now Sam was a little bit older. And so when you guys had him, it was before all the social media stuff was available. It was before
mhm.
smartphones. So I know now a lot of parents get a diagnosis, HIE, and they go home and they Google it and they find all the support groups. What kind of things did you guys find to be helpful early on with Sam? Or what was the most helpful resource you guys had throughout life?
Well, what was it then? Yahoo groups, Yahoo bulletin boards.
Yep.
Is that what it was?
I think they were listservs, but yeah.
Yeah. I used those. It was funny because I had I found I had to be kind of careful with the groups that I felt comfortable with were not kids that necessarily were 100% like Sam, because then it got to be too much comparing, um, too much of the other kids smiling.
Yeah.
So I had to find kids who were similar but not 100% the same, and then I didn't have that. So yeah, but I found a lot of help and a lot of information and a lot of the therapies and things that we tried from those kinds of groups. Like for example, there was a tracheostomy group. That's such a broad thing. I didn't have to compare anything. I just got information about trachs. And so that was because I think Sam was probably about as severe as, other, except not needing a ventilator, but that was
Right.
just,
Yeah, and I mean with HIE, it's such a broad, and there's some
mhm,
kids that are so mildly impaired, you can
yes.
really even tell that they have it. And then there's
Hmm.
the other end of the spectrum with Sam.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, there's such a wide range. HIE is such a generic term, and once you
Right.
know how to say it, then it's about the same time you learn that it means nothing.
Right. Like cerebral palsy is just, yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it means nothing.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, so okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like to tell other families, or anything else you'd like to just say about Sam and the amazing life that he lived before we end the recording?
Um, no, nothing I can, I don't, I'm sure I'll have 1,000 things once we disconnect, but you know how that goes. But no, I think I just, we just tried to keep doing whatever we could. Sam was, I remember when we took him home from the hospital, they told us that the house needed to be sterile and that everything needed to be clean all the time. And on the ride home from the hospital, I said, he's not going to make it. This is not, there is no way. And I just went, well, okay, and I think that's probably, he was so exposed to dirt and just fine. And, we had him doing all kinds of stuff. And, you just go out and do what you do. And you just can't, you just can't not, because then you regret the things you didn't do.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with Sam, with
well,
the whole
thank you for asking.
and thank you for sharing Sam with me. I was so glad I got to come and meet him and meet you
Me
guys.
too.
Gosh, he's such an amazing kid. And
Me too.
thank you so much.